Well, how's everyone doing in our Riv communities? I am Pastor James. I'm here with Elizabeth, who is our new Director of Communications at Riverview. And we're not going to go into that right now. We have limited time, but that is a big job. So, welcome. Thankful that you're part of the team and making all things communication happen. She's going to share some of her thoughts about our topic. The kind of origin of this discussion is with so many voices really in our culture with social media, and everybody has a microphone, everybody can just kind of weigh in whether they have any expertise or not, and a lot of just the way things have changed in the church around difficult conversations, difficult topics. We thought it would be really good to jump into a sermon series and also provide some equipping for our Riv community folks as well, just how we ought to conduct ourselves in situations like this. Your ministers will have introduced you to the terms Irenic and Polemic. Irenic kind of aimed towards peace. Polemic more is the art of disputation, and obviously we all know people that are polemic about like everything, like their favorite football team or ice cream or the Bachelor and Bachelorette franchises or whatever that might be, and we know people that are like huge peacemakers, that are just never want to get into any conflict. Or that's not really what we're talking about. We're not talking about as much about disposition, your personal preference or style, but more about biblically how do we approach one another in various situations. And the Bible speaks a lot about both. In Romans 12, it says, "Live in harmony with one another. Do not be wise in your own estimation. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. If possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." So that's like be Irenic, right? The aim is peace. Then if you flip over to Titus chapter 1, it says, "You should hold to the faithful message as it has been taught, so that you will be able to encourage with sound teaching and refute those who contradict it. For there are many rebellious people full of empty talk and deception. It is necessary to silence them. They are ruining entire households by teaching what they shouldn't in order to get money dishonestly." So that's like a situation where it's like necessary to be polemic. And that's kind of my thinking on it, is Irenic is always the goal, that we should be kind, gentle, seeking peace and unity, and then polemic when necessary. There are certain situations when the core gospel truths are at stake. Or I always, when my wife and I were talking, she's a very Irenic person, but if someone were to come after Jay, our middle son, she just becomes like extremely, like, no, 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 we're going to be confrontational about this. And so it's not one better than the other, but how do these kind of fit together? So, and Jesus modeled this so well, and we're going to talk about that here in a second. So I brought in Elizabeth. She's fresh and new to this topic. I just gave her these questions like 10 minutes ago, and they're the same questions that you're going to be talking about inside of your with your ministers in your Riv community. And we're just going to get her observations, just kind of as a everyday church member and now new part of our staff, kind of what her perspective is. I have no idea what she's going to say, but I'm interested to hear her perspective. So what observations do you have about how disagreement or difficult topics are handled in the church today? And then if you had like a magic wand and could change one thing about that, what would it be?
So my first thought is that disagreements are handled really, really well. And people don't disagree because you don't really hear about it. But oftentimes I think if we do have a disagreement or we don't agree with something that the church stands for, we just leave. We leave the church.
Yeah.
And then we fight about it online. We post something online, or we talk behind people's backs, or we say, oh, they're one of those churches. And we never actually talk about it within the context where it could matter. If I could see something change, it would be that we together as Riv, as a large C church, feel able to discuss those disagreements, to bring our questions and to bring our positions that don't feel like they're in alignment with what we hear on the pulpit every week, to bring them and to be heard and to have those conversations with grace and full of truth, and not to feel like we are personally attacked or that it is something wrong to have these discussions and to have these questions and to debate these issues, that it's okay to have conversations about difficult things.
Absolutely. And it's okay to be around people that you disagree with.
Right.
Because that is happening pretty much with every single person that you know.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's really insightful. What is your natural disposition? Do you tend to skew more towards Irenic or polemic? We don't know each other very well, so I don't know your answer to this question.
I am aggressively Irenic. If there was like deeply avoidant of all conflict, that would be, I'm a middle child. That's how I approach most things. But in talking about this, there are some issues that are polemic, that are worth debating, that are worth taking a stance and having an opinion and vocalizing that opinion in a graceful, gentle way, that isn't dead set on proving that I'm right, but also communicating that there are some things that I firmly believe in that are worth voicing.
Sure. And you kind of muster up that inner polemic side when necessary. What about some examples where you've seen Jesus take an Irenic approach or maybe a polemic approach? Are there any that come to mind when you think about Jesus in the scripture?
I think of Jesus talking with his disciples when they approached him about who was the greatest among them and which of the disciples was most important, after witnessing a couple of miracles. And he responds gently that, it doesn't really matter. That's not why we're here. And then later, a similar situation comes up, and I believe it's Peter who's called Satan. And I feel like that's when he really takes that polemic approach of calling out
very
something
confrontational
that needs to be discussed. Yes.
Yep. Yeah, I think that Jesus modeled this really well. And there'll be some scripture passages for you to use in your Riv communities to kind of draw that out. But I just think about the same thing of his gentleness and his empathy and listening and presence with so many people, and then turning around with the Pharisees and calling them a brood of vipers. You know what I mean? And so there is this kind of time and place and who's in front of you, and that'll all be kind of something that you guys can discuss with your folks, and hope it's a good discussion for you. Thank you, Elizabeth, for being with us today and for being part of what we're doing.